Eva Sterling, the paralyzed daughter of billionaire aerospace CEO Richard Sterling, graduates alone until widowed single father Daniel Carter and his 6-year-old daughter Lily become the only people to applaud her. Lily knows Eva from her school storytelling visits, and their friendship draws Eva and Daniel together. Eva soon discovers Daniel was once a decorated Air Force officer whose career was destroyed 7 years earlier after the disastrous Eagle fire mission. Daniel had uncovered evidence that leaked intelligence caused 2 soldiers' deaths, but Richard buried his report and made him the scapegoat to protect powerful defense interests. When Richard threatens Daniel again, Eva confronts her father and obtains documents proving the cover-up. Choosing Daniel and the truth over her privileged life, she loses her financial support, medical insurance, home, and assistance, but rebuilds independently with Daniel and Lily beside her. Their bond becomes love, and Daniel proposes. A year later, they marry with Lily, celebrating their new family. Richard quietly attends, gives them an accessible house, and submits a confession requesting that Eagle fire be reinvestigated, potentially clearing Daniel's name. Eva, Daniel, and Lily finally begin a new life together, transformed by lost truth and the family they chose. The graduation ceremony stretched across the university lawn under a brilliant June sun. Rows of chairs filled with proud families, their cheers greeting each graduate who crossed the stage. Eva Sterling moved forward in her wheelchair, her graduation gown flowing gracefully around her. The silence that followed her name was deafening. No parents, no friends, no voice calling out in celebration. From the back row, a tall man stood up, his weathered hand holding that of a 6-year-old girl. They were the only ones who moved, the only ones who clapped. Their applause echoed across the quiet space. Eva turned, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Eva Sterling had once been the kind of student whose name appeared on every honor roll, whose essays won competitions, whose future seemed written in gold letters. The only daughter of Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Aerospace. She had grown up in a world of private schools and boardrooms, charity galas, and carefully curated appearances. But beneath the polished surface, Eva had always felt like a bird in a gilded cage, her father's expectations weighing heavier than any textbook she'd ever carried. Literature had been her escape, while her father spoke of profit margins and market shares. Eva lost herself in Dickinson's verses and Woolf's streams of consciousness. She'd chosen to major in English literature against his wishes, a small rebellion that felt monumental at the time. Her professors praised her insight, her ability to find meaning in the spaces between words. She'd been selected for a prestigious writing fellowship, had plans to pursue her MFA to write the novel that had been growing in her heart since she was 15. Then came the accident. 2 years ago, driving back from a field research trip to interview rural storytellers. Her car had been hit by a drunk driver running a red light. The impact crushed her lower spine. She'd woken up 3 weeks later to a doctor explaining terms like incomplete spinal cord injury and permanent paralysis from the L2 vertebrae. The first thing she'd noticed wasn't that she couldn't feel her legs, but that her father was already managing the narrative, speaking to doctors about treatment plans while she lay there voiceless. The months that followed blurred together like watercolors in rain, physical therapy, failed surgeries, endless medications. Her father hired the best specialists, the most expensive equipment, the most qualified caregivers. But what Eva needed, space to grieve, time to adjust, freedom to feel those things, couldn't be purchased. Richard Sterling controlled everything: which friends could visit, which doctors she saw, even which books her aide brought to her room. Her world shrank from university halls to hospital corridors to the confines of their estate. The only light had come 6 months ago when she'd volunteered to read stories at Madison Elementary. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, a favor for her former professor who now coordinated community outreach. But something about those small faces, those eager eyes, had awakened something Eva thought had died in the accident. She'd returned every week, her wheelchair becoming less of a barrier and more of a unique throne from which she spun tales of adventure and hope. Daniel Carter existed in a different universe entirely. 35 years old, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen too much but refused to let it break him. His shoulders bore invisible weight, the memory of brothers in arms. Missions completed and failed, the price of service that civilians would never understand. Once he'd been Captain Carter, leader of an elite Air Force Special Operations Unit. Now he was just Daniel, a technician who fixed HVAC systems and went home to the only mission that mattered anymore. His daughter Lily was 6 years old, all bright eyes and boundless curiosity. She had her mother's delicate features but her father's unwavering spirit. Sarah had died bringing Lily into the world, complications that no one had seen coming, leaving Daniel to navigate parenthood alone. He'd learned to braid hair from YouTube videos to distinguish between tears that needed band-aids and tears that needed patience. Lily didn't remember her mother, but Daniel made sure she knew Sarah through stories. Through the lullabies he'd learned to sing through the garden they planted together every spring with Sarah's favorite flowers. The past was a locked room Daniel never entered. His military career, the medals in a box in the attic. The brothers, he'd lost all of it. Stayed buried beneath the daily routine of packed lunches and bedtime stories. He never spoke of Eagle Fire, never mentioned Richard Sterling's name, never explained why a decorated special operations officer was now fixing air conditioners for a living. Some truths were too dangerous to voice. Some battles too costly to fight when you had a daughter to protect. Lily had been the one to drag him to the graduation ceremony. She'd won an essay contest writing about someone who inspires me, choosing the lady in the wheelchair who'd visited her class to tell stories. Eva's voice painting pictures of faraway lands, her eyes holding sadness that even a 6-year-old could recognize, her smile when Lily asked endless questions. It had all gone into a child's honest prose that had somehow won first place. The prize included an invitation to the university's graduation, where Lily would read her essay before the ceremony. Daniel had tried to decline politely, but Lily's determination was a force of nature inherited from both parents. After the ceremony dispersed and families gathered for photographs, Eva wheeled herself to a quiet spot behind the auditorium. The stone bench there had been her refuge during undergraduate years, a place to read between classes. Now she sat beside it, not on it. Another small adjustment among thousands. The celebration continued without her. Voices and laughter creating a symphony she wasn't part of. Her father hadn't come. Her mother had been gone for 10 years. The few friends she'd had before the accident had drifted away uncomfortable with the change. The sound of running feet made her look up. Lily Carter bounded toward her blonde pigtails flying, a piece of paper clutched in her small hands. Behind her, moving with measured steps, came Daniel. Eva recognized them from the ceremony, the only ones who'd applauded. Lily skidded to a stop just short of the wheelchair. Suddenly shy, she held out the paper, a crayon drawing of a woman with yellow hair sitting in a chair with wheels. But rising from the chair was the same woman with wings soaring above clouds. "I made this for you," Lily said, her voice small but determined. "Because in your stories, everyone can fly." Eva took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. No one had given her art that wasn't commissioned by her father, approved by committee. This simple crayon drawing meant more than any of those. "Thank you," she whispered, then louder. "Thank you, Lily. It's beautiful." Daniel stepped forward then, and Eva truly saw him for the first time. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that came from hard-won peace. His eyes were gray storm clouds with sunlight behind them. There was something familiar about his face, though she couldn't place it. He extended his hand, calloused from work. "Daniel Carter," he said simply. "Lily's father. She insisted we come congratulate you properly." The name hit Eva like cold water. Daniel Carter. She'd seen that name before, in her father's study in files marked confidential. Her hand froze halfway to his, the silent stretch between them loaded with unspoken recognition. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Not surprise, but resignation. "You know who I am," Eva said. "I know who your father is," Daniel replied carefully. "I came because of Lily, nothing more." But even as he said it, their eyes held questions neither could voice. Lily, oblivious to the tension, had discovered a butterfly and was following it with delighted exclamations. Eva watched the child's innocence, then looked back at Daniel. There was no anger in his face, no accusation, just a weariness that spoke of battles fought and lost. "Daddy, can Miss Eva come get ice cream with us?" Lily called out. "Please, you promised we could celebrate after." Daniel looked at his daughter, then at Diva. The smart thing would be to make excuses to leave now. But Lily was already taking Eva's hand, chattering about her favorite flavors. And Eva, who'd been alone in crowds for 2 years, found herself nodding. "If your father doesn't mind," she said quietly. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her face, loneliness that matched his own perhaps, or genuine kindness toward his daughter, made him nod slowly. "There's a place 2 blocks over. Nothing fancy." They made an unlikely trio moving down the sidewalk, the man walking slowly to match the wheelchair's pace, the child skipping between them, and Eva navigating curbs she'd never noticed before. The ice cream shop was indeed nothing fancy, just a local place with mismatched chairs. But it was real in a way Eva's life hadn't been for years. The name Eagle Fire had become synonymous with failure in certain military circles, though the full truth was buried beneath classified stamps and redacted documents. 7 years ago, Daniel had led a 6-man team into hostile territory tasked with extracting 2 journalists who'd been taken hostage by insurgents. The intelligence had been solid, the plan meticulous. Daniel had spent weeks preparing, studying satellite images, coordinating with local assets, drilling his team until every movement was muscle memory. The compound was supposed to be lightly guarded. Their intelligence indicated a window between guard shifts, a vulnerability they could exploit. Daniel's team had moved like shadows through the desert night, reaching the extraction point exactly on schedule. But when they breached the compound, they found it empty. The hostages had been moved hours earlier, and in their place was an ambush. The firefight lasted 17 minutes. That felt like 17 hours. Staff Sergeant Martinez took a bullet meant for Daniel. Lieutenant Thompson didn't make it to the extraction helicopter. 2 good men, 2 friends, 2 futures erased because someone had leaked their operational timeline. Daniel's after-action report had been thorough, highlighting the intelligence failure, the clear evidence of a leak from within the command structure. He'd identified security vulnerabilities, traced the information chain, presented evidence that pointed to gross negligence, at minimum treason at worst. The report went up the chain of command and disappeared. 3 weeks later, Daniel was called before a review board. The official verdict was operational failure due to commander error. The intelligence failure was never mentioned. The 2 soldiers who died were blamed posthumously for breaking protocol, and Daniel, who'd served with distinction for 12 years, was given a choice: accept a dishonorable discharge or face court-martial. The signature on his discharge papers belonged to Richard Sterling, then serving as Deputy Secretary for Defense Procurement. Sterling had needed a scapegoat to protect the defense contractors and intelligence officials who'd actually failed. Daniel was convenient, expendable, a soldier without political connections. Daniel had thought about fighting about going to the press, but then Sarah had told him she was pregnant, and suddenly he had something more important than his reputation to protect. He'd signed the papers, packed his uniforms away, and never spoke of it again. The truth would have changed nothing for the dead, and would have only endangered the living. Richard Sterling probably never thought about Eagle Fire anymore. For him, it had been a problem to manage a potential scandal to bury. He'd never met the mothers who'd received folded flags, never stood at the graves of men who'd died believing in their mission. Daniel carried those ghosts every day, not because he'd failed them, but because he'd been forbidden to give them justice. 7 years hadn't dulled the weight of that injustice, but it had taught him to carry it quietly, to transform grief into purpose, to focus on the living daughter who needed him more than the dead soldiers needed vengeance. The first few meetings after the ice cream shop happened organically, almost by accident. Eva had started visiting the library's children's section on Saturday mornings, reading to whoever gathered around. Lily and Daniel appeared the second week, then the third, until it became an unspoken routine. Daniel would sit in the back pretending to read newspapers while actually watching Eva transform into someone luminous when she held a book. Her voice would change with each character. Her hands would paint pictures in the air, and for those moments the wheelchair disappeared entirely. They began talking during Lily's bathroom breaks or while she picked out new books. Conversations that started with weather and Lily's school gradually deepened. Eva learned that Daniel woke at 4:30 every morning, a habit from military days. He couldn't break. Daniel discovered that Eva painted at night when insomnia struck, that her apartment's walls were covered with canvases depicting skies she couldn't reach. "Why aviation engineering?" Eva asked one afternoon while Lily was absorbed in picture books. After the military, Daniel's hands still on his coffee cup. Needed something with clear problems and fixable solutions. Machines are honest. They don't work. You figure out why you fix them. No politics, no classified failures. The weight in that last phrase didn't escape Eva. She wanted to ask more, but Lily returned with an armload of books about dragons, and the moment passed. Another Saturday, Daniel mentioned Sarah, not in the past tense way he usually did, but present and vivid. "She would have loved your reading voice," he said suddenly. "Sarah, she was always reading to her belly when she was pregnant with Lily. Said the baby needed to know stories were waiting." Eva's eyes glistened. "Tell me about her." So he did. About the nurse who challenged him at pool in a bar near base, who'd beaten him 3 games straight, then agreed to a date. About her laugh that could fill empty rooms. Her stubborn streak that rivaled his own. Her dreams of opening a clinic in underserved communities. About the pregnancy they'd celebrated, the nursery they'd painted yellow. About how she'd been his anchor during the worst of the Eagle Fire aftermath. How she'd believed in him when the world labeled him a failure. "The doctors said it was an amniotic fluid embolism," Daniel said quietly. 1 in 40,000 chance. Nothing anyone could have done. She got to hold Lily for 6 minutes. Made me promise to tell our daughter she was loved every single day. Eva reached across the table and took his hand, not in pity, but in understanding. Loss was a language they both spoke fluently. Her fingers were soft against his callous palm, and neither pulled away. Lily looked up from her book, saw their joined hands, and smiled before returning to her dragons. They talked about the accident only once, on a day when rain kept everyone else away. Eva described waking up to a body that no longer obeyed to legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The drunk driver had walked away uninjured, had served 6 months, had sent a letter of apology that her father had burned before she could read it. The worst part wasn't the chair. Eva said, watching rain streak the windows. It was how everyone started seeing me as broken, like I'd become the injury instead of a person who'd been injured. Dad especially. He went from controlling to suffocating. Daniel understood that too. The way people's perception could cage you more than any physical limitation. He'd gone from decorated officer to disgraced soldier overnight. Watched friends cross streets to avoid him. Some prisons didn't have bars. As weeks turned into months, their Saturday meetings evolved into something neither had expected. Coffee during the week while Lily was at school. Text messages about books Daniel thought Lily would like. Phone calls when Eva's insomnia struck and Daniel was already awake from old habits. They were building something delicate and unnamed, a connection that transcended their complicated histories. Richard Sterling arrived at Daniel's apartment on a Tuesday evening without warning. Daniel had just finished helping Lily with homework when the knock came, 3 sharp raps that spoke of authority. Through the peephole, he saw a face he'd only encountered in photographs. Older now, silver-haired, but still carrying the same cold efficiency that had signed away Daniel's career 7 years ago. Daniel opened the door but didn't invite him in. They stood there, threshold between them. 2 men who'd been connected by destruction but had never actually met. Richard's suit probably cost more than Daniel made in a month. Everything about him screamed power. "Mr. Carter," Richard said as if the name itself was distasteful. "I think we need to discuss boundaries." "Lily, go to your room," Daniel said quietly. His daughter looked between the men, sensing danger, and retreated. Only when her door clicked shut did Daniel speak again. "Say what you came to say." Richard's smile was razor thin. "You know who I am. You know what I can do. I've already ended your career once. Don't make me be more thorough. I'm not making you do anything," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "Your daughter is an adult who makes her own choices. My daughter is vulnerable, injured. She doesn't need complications from someone with your history." The word history hung between them like a loaded weapon. Daniel could have argued, could have pointed out the irony of Richard Sterling talking about complications when he'd been the one to bury the truth about Eagle Fire. Instead, he simply said, "Eva knows exactly who I am." Richard's composure cracked slightly. Does she know about the 2 soldiers who died under your command? About the failure that cost the failure that you manufactured to protect your defense contractor friends?" Daniel's voice remained level, but his hands clenched. "The men who died because someone in your office leaked operational details 7 years ago?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Let's talk about that history." The silence stretched. Richard's face had gone pale. Before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Yes." Both men turned. Eva sat in her wheelchair at the end of the hallway, having arrived so quietly they hadn't heard the elevator. Her face was composed, but her eyes blazed with fury. Eva Richard started shifting immediately into the paternal tone he used for public appearances. "You shouldn't be here. Let me handle." "Handle." Eva's laugh was bitter. "Like you handled Eagle Fire. Like you handled my accident. Like you've handled every single aspect of my life since Mom died." She wheeled closer, positioning herself between the two men. To Daniel, she said, "Take Lily and go to the park. I need to talk to my father alone." Daniel hesitated, concerned, but Eva's expression was steel wrapped in silk. He nodded, called for Lily, and left father and daughter to their reckoning. The conversation that followed was 22 years in the making. Eva had always been the good daughter, the achievement her father could parade at functions. But sitting there in a stranger's hallway, she finally understood that she'd never been a daughter to him, just another asset to manage. "You destroyed an innocent man to protect your career," she said quietly. 7 years ago, you signed papers that ruined him, and now you want to control who I spend time with." "I protected interests bigger than one soldier," Richard replied, falling back on utilitarian logic. "Sacrifices were necessary. Whose sacrifice, not yours, never yours." Eva's voice was steady, controlled. "I'm done being managed, Dad, done being your project. If you try to interfere with Daniel or Lily again, I'll go public with everything." Richard Sterling looked at his daughter and saw a stranger. The girl who'd once sought his approval was gone, replaced by a woman who'd found something worth fighting for. He left without another word. Eva's friend from college, Marcus, worked in cybersecurity for the Department of Defense. When Eva called asking for a favor, a very specific, possibly illegal favor, Marcus had listened and agreed. "Always knew your dad was a bastard," he'd said simply. "Give me 3 days." The files arrived encrypted on a flash drive. Eva's hands shook as she plugged it into her laptop. Dozens of documents filled her screen, but one stood out. Daniel's original after-action report from Eagle Fire, dated 7 years ago. Reading it was like watching tragedy unfold. Daniel's analysis had been meticulous, professional, despite personal loss. He'd identified 3 critical security breaches, all traceable to the Pentagon's procurement office, her father's domain at the time. He'd recommended a full investigation, had provided evidence of intelligence being sold, and at the bottom, in her father's handwriting, "Bury this. Use Carter as the fall." Eva printed everything, her stomach churning. Her father hadn't just destroyed Daniel's career. He deliberately protected the people responsible for 2 soldiers' deaths. The defense contractors, mentioned in Daniel's report, had all received major contracts from Sterling Aerospace within 6 months of Eagle Fire. Blood money calculated in cold. She drove to Daniel's apartment that evening, the folder heavy in her lap. When he opened the door, she held it out wordlessly. Daniel took it, flipped through the first few pages, his face unchanging. 7 years of wondering if he'd imagined the conspiracy, and here was proof in black and white. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But Eva, if you use this, you'll lose everything. He'll cut you off completely." Eva's smile was sad but determined. "I've already lost everything that mattered. My mobility, my mother, my independence. I almost lost myself. What's money compared to that? It's not just money. It's your medical care, your treatments." "My cage," Eva interrupted. "A very comfortable cage, but still a cage." She looked at him directly. "I'd rather struggle in freedom than live comfortably in captivity." Daniel studied her face, seeing not the broken girl from graduation, but a woman who'd found her strength. "This isn't your fight," he said gently. "This happened 7 years ago. It's ancient history now. It became my fight the moment I chose you." Eva replied. "Both of you, you're worth more than his money, Daniel. You're worth the truth." Richard Sterling's retaliation was swift and thorough. Eva's credit cards were canceled within hours. Her medical insurance was terminated. The apartment he'd been paying for sent an eviction notice. The private aide who'd helped her with daily tasks was recalled. Even her wheelchair-accessible van was repossessed. Richard Sterling knew how to wage war through bureaucracy. Eva had expected it, had prepared as much as possible. She'd withdrawn cash before confronting him, had already been in touch with social services about state-provided medical care, had researched affordable housing options. But the reality was still jarring. going from unlimited resources to counting every dollar from the best specialists to overcrowded clinics. Daniel found her crying in her empty apartment 3 days after the eviction notice, surrounded by boxes she couldn't lift. Without a word, he sat beside her wheelchair and let her lean against him until the tears stopped. "I'm not crying because I regret it," she said finally. "I'm crying because I'm scared. I've never been without his money. I don't know how to do this." "You learn," Daniel said simply. "One day at a time you adapt, you survive, and you don't do it alone." He helped her find a small apartment on the ground floor of an older building, wheelchair accessible and close to public transportation. His friends from his veterans group helped move her belongings. Men who understood loyalty and sacrifice without needing explanations. Lily decorated Eva's new bedroom with paper stars she'd cut out herself so you can see the sky even inside. The adjustment was brutal. State-provided health care meant long waits and limited options. The loss of her private aid meant depending on Daniel or neighbors for help. Some days the weight of what she'd given up felt crushing. But then Lily would arrive with homework, or Daniel would appear with groceries and stay for dinner, and Eva would remember what she'd gained. She started tutoring online to earn money. Her literature degree finally useful. She applied for disability benefits, navigating bureaucracy that seemed designed to discourage. She learned to budget, to shop sales, to swallow pride and accept help. Every small victory felt monumental. Daniel watched her transform from privilege to purpose with respect that bordered on awe. He'd known soldiers who'd broken under less pressure, but Eva met each challenge with determination. She wasn't just surviving. She was discovering who she was without her father's influence. The woman emerging from that crucible was stronger than either of them had expected. 6 months after leaving her father's sphere of influence, Eva submitted a painting to the university's alumni exhibition. The theme was Reclaiming Light, meant to showcase how graduates were making their mark. Eva had painted through the night for weeks, her small apartment reeking of oils and turpentine. The painting showed a woman in a wheelchair at the bottom of the canvas, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man, his body positioned to shield her from invisible winds. In the distance was a child with arms outstretched like wings. The entire piece was suffused with light that seemed to come from within the figures rather than from any external source. The exhibition opening drew a modest crowd. Eva had debated attending, knowing her father might show up. But Lily had made her a crown of dandelions that morning, declaring her the queen of art. And Daniel had worn his only suit, and somehow their presence made everything else irrelevant. Eva was scheduled to speak about her piece. When her turn came, Daniel pushed her wheelchair to the small platform, while Lily stood beside them wearing her best dress. "This painting is about finding light. Not in spite of darkness, but because of it," Eva began, her voice carrying across the hushed gallery. "We all break, some visibly, some invisibly, but we all carry fractures. The question isn't whether we'll break, it's who stands with us." In the breaking, she talked about loss transforming into connection, about strangers becoming family, about love growing in unexpected soil. She didn't mention her father by name, didn't speak of eagle fire or sacrifices or betrayal, but those who knew understood. "I cannot walk," Eva concluded, looking directly at Daniel and Lily. "But I am not fallen. I cannot run, but I am not still. I cannot stand, but I am not alone." That's what this painting is about. The people who become our legs when ours don't work, who become our wings when we forget we can fly. The applause was genuine, warm, sustained. Several people approached afterward to discuss purchasing the piece, but Eva politely declined. This painting wasn't for sale. It was a declaration, a promise, a love letter to the family she'd chosen. What Eva didn't know was that Richard Sterling stood in the back of the gallery, having slipped in after the lights dimmed. He watched his daughter speak with confidence he'd never seen, watched her smile at the man he tried to destroy 7 years ago, watched her light up when the little girl whispered something in her ear. For the first time in his life, Richard Sterling saw his daughter not as an extension of himself, but as her own person. His eyes grew wet, something that hadn't happened since his wife's funeral. For the first time, he wondered if his version of protection had actually been prison. He left before the lights came up, before anyone could see him, but not before taking a long look at the painting, at the way the three figures seemed to complete each other, at the light that came from within rather than without. It was, he realized with something approaching humility, the first true thing his daughter had ever created. The tears that fell as he walked to his car were for all the years he'd missed, all the genuine moments he'd controlled out of existence. The park was Lily's favorite, with its duck pond and climbing structures. Daniel had suggested they come here after the exhibition had packed a picnic dinner. Lily had run off to feed the ducks, leaving Daniel and Eva in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "I need to tell you something," Daniel said suddenly, his voice carrying weight. "About that first day at your graduation. I knew who you were. I'd seen your picture after the accident. I almost didn't come. But Lily had written that essay about you, about how you made stories come alive, even though you couldn't stand up. She said you were magic sitting down." Eva smiled softly. She wasn't wrong. No, Daniel agreed. She wasn't. "But Eva, I need you to know I never approached you because of your father. I never wanted revenge for what happened 7 years ago. That part of my life was over." "I know," Eva said simply. "You're not built for revenge, Daniel. You're built for protection, for loyalty, for love." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, watching Lily chase a particularly bold duck around the pond's edge. Then he stood, walked around to face Eva's wheelchair, and knelt, putting them at eye level. "I lost my career, my brothers in arms, my reputation. I lost Sarah. I thought I'd lost my capacity to love anyone except Lily." His hands found Eva's. "Then you happened. You with your stories and your strength and your stubborn refusal to be what anyone else decided 7 years ago. Your father took everything from me. But maybe it had to happen that way for me to be here. Now with you." From his pocket he pulled a small velvet box. Inside was a simple ring, a single sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. Not expensive, but real and solid. "I can't give you wealth or the life you were raised for. But I can give you mornings with terrible coffee and bedtime stories for Lily. I can give you someone who will never see the chair before the woman. I can give you love that isn't conditional." Eva was crying now, tears of joy rather than loss. "Daniel, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "Yes," Eva interrupted. "Yes to terrible coffee and bedtime stories. Yes to complicated and real. Yes to you, to Lily, to us." She leaned forward, framing his face with her hands. "I don't need someone to push my chair. I need someone to go beside me. And that's you." Lily, who'd been secretly watching, let out a whoop and ran toward them. "Does this mean Eva's going to be my mom? If that's okay with you," Eva said, pulling the girl close. "It's better than okay," Lily declared. "We're going to be a real family." Daniel stood, one hand on Eva's shoulder, the other holding Lily's fingers. The sun was setting, painting the world gold. They weren't conventional. A single father whose honor was stolen 7 years ago, a paralyzed woman who'd lost everything to find herself, a motherless child who brought them together. But they were choosing each other, and that was enough. The wedding took place 1 year later in a small garden behind the community center where Eva now taught literacy classes. It was nothing like the society wedding Richard Sterling would have planned. No string quartet, no ice sculptures. Instead, there were wildflowers in mason jars, lights strung between trees, and a potluck dinner provided by their patchwork family of friends. Eva wore a simple white dress that flowed over her wheelchair, which Lily had decorated with ribbons and baby's breath that morning. Her hair was loose, crowned with daisies Lily had picked. She'd never felt more beautiful. The chair wasn't hidden. It was simply part of her, adorned and celebrated like the rest. Daniel stood at the makeshift altar in his dress uniform, pulled from storage and pressed with military precision. His veteran friends had insisted, saying 7 years was long enough to hide from honor that was stolen, not lost. He looked older than his 35 years, but at peace in a way Eva had never seen. When their eyes met as she came down the aisle, pushed by Marcus, who'd agreed to give her away, Daniel's composure nearly broke. Lily served as flower girl, maid of honor, and ring bearer. Taking her duties seriously, she'd practiced her walk for weeks, matching Eva's chair perfectly. She wore a yellow dress because yellow is the happiest color, and carried a sign she'd made herself that read, "Finally a complete family." The ceremony was brief, the vows personal. Eva spoke about finding strength in vulnerability, about love that saw past limitations. Daniel talked about second chances, about hearts that could expand after breaking, about 7 years in the wilderness leading to this moment of grace. When they exchanged rings, Lily stood between them, one hand on each arm, making the union a trinity. The surprise came during the reception. As the sun began to set and the first dance was announced, everyone expected Daniel to dance while Eva watched. Instead, he'd worked with her physical therapist for months, with Daniel's support and a special harness hidden beneath her dress. Eva stood not for long, but she stood her arms around his neck, his arms supporting her, and they swayed together to a song about coming home. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Marcus captured it on video, calling it the most beautiful 30 seconds I've ever filmed. But for Eva and Daniel, the world had disappeared. There was only the music, the gentle sway, the miracle of being held. As the song ended and Daniel helped Eva back to her chair, a movement at the garden's edge caught her eye. Richard Sterling stood in the shadows, uninvited but present. Their eyes met across the distance. He didn't approach, but he raised his hand slightly, a greeting, an acknowledgement, perhaps even a blessing. Then he turned and left, leaving behind an envelope on the gift table. Inside was a deed to a house fully accessible in both Eva and Daniel's names, and a note. I was wrong about many things, but you were never one of them. Be happy. R.S. There was also a second document, a letter to the Pentagon requesting a review of the Eagle Fire incident from 7 years ago with Richard's full confession of his role in the cover-up. It wouldn't restore Daniel's rank or erase the years of struggle, but it would clear his name. Eva showed both documents to Daniel later after the guests had gone, and Lily had fallen asleep against Eva's shoulder. He's trying, she said quietly. Too little too late, Daniel asked, no judgment in his voice. Maybe Eva admitted. But it's something, and after 7 years of nothing, something feels like everything. They spent their wedding night in their new home, the three of them camping in the living room because the bedrooms weren't furnished yet. Lily made a fort of moving boxes, declaring it the castle of the Carter family. They told stories by flashlight, ate leftover cake for midnight breakfast, and fell asleep in a pile of pillows and possibility. The morning sun streamed through empty windows, painting geometric patterns on the hardwood floors. Eva woke first, Daniel's arm around her waist. Lily's small body curled against her other side. She couldn't feel her legs, would never feel them again, but she felt held. She felt whole. She felt home. Outside, birds began their morning chorus. A delivery truck rumbled past. Church bells marked the new day. It was an ordinary Sunday morning, but for the family waking in the unfurnished house, it was the first morning of their extraordinary life together. Daniel stirred, pressed a kiss to Eva's temple. Morning, Mrs. Carter. Morning, Mr. Carter, she replied, smiling against his shoulder. Lily woke with a dramatic yawn, immediately launching into plans for their first full day. They needed furniture and groceries and pictures on the walls. They needed to explore the neighborhood and find the best places for Lily to play. They needed to make this house a home. As they prepared breakfast on a camping stove, laughing at the absurdity of their empty kitchen, Eva thought about the journey that had brought them here. The loneliness of that graduation day seemed like a lifetime ago. The woman who'd sat alone had been transformed not by miracle cures, but by the simple act of being chosen. She watched Daniel teaching Lily to flip pancakes both covered in flour, and felt her heart expand. They were an unlikely family forged from loss and betrayal and hope. Daniel still carried ghosts from 7 years ago. Eva still faced daily challenges. Lily still missed the mother she'd never known. But together, they were writing a new story. One where wheelchairs could dance, where broken things became beautiful. Where love was not despite damage, but because of the courage it took to trust after breaking. The pancakes were slightly burned. The orange juice was warm. The camping chairs creaked. But as they ate their imperfect breakfast in their empty house, they were complete. They were chosen. They were home. Later, as they unpacked boxes, Eva found herself thinking about the painting from the exhibition now hanging in their living room. The three figures supporting each other, creating their own light. She'd painted their future before she'd known it was possible. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked, noticing her distant expression. Happy endings? Eva replied. How they're not really endings at all, just places where one story stops so another can begin. Lily looked up from unpacking her stuffed animals. Will you tell us a story tonight, Mom? About princesses and dragons, Mom. The words still sent warmth through Eva's chest. Every night if you want, she promised. And Daddy can do the voices, Lily decided. He's good at dragon voices. Daniel demonstrated his dragon voice, sending Lily into giggles. Eva watched them, her husband and daughter, and thought about all the stories they'd tell in this house. Stories of love that didn't require fixing. Stories of families that chose each other. Stories of women who couldn't walk but soared anyway. Of men who'd lost honor but found grace. Of children who bridged worlds with innocence. The sun tracked across their new home throughout the day, marking time not in loss but in laughter. By evening, they'd managed to assemble one bed and locate the box with sheets. They ordered pizza from a place that didn't know their names yet, but would soon. They sat on the floor backs against the wall and watched the sunset through their window. "We did it," Eva said softly. "We really did it." Did what Daniel asked, threading his fingers through hers. Made it through. Found each other. Built something new from all the broken pieces. "We're not done building," Daniel reminded her. "This is just the foundation." Eva smiled, thinking of all the days ahead. There would be hard days. Days when the chair felt like a prison. When ghosts from 7 years ago grew loud, when they'd have to explain to Lily why some families looked different. But there would be more days like this. Days of choosing each other, of building together, of love that transforms sacrifice into strength. As the stars emerged, the Carter family prepared for their first night in their new home. Daniel carried Eva up the stairs. They'd install the lift next week. While Lily ran ahead to prepare their bed, with every pillow they brushed teeth at a sink, surrounded by boxes, told stories, and voices that echoed off empty walls and settled into sleep, wrapped around each other like quotation marks around their favorite sentence. The house was quiet, except for the settling of new wood and the whisper of wind through trees. Somewhere in the walls, the foundation held steady, built to weather storms, like the family sleeping within. It was new, but solid, empty, but full of promise, a structure waiting to become a story worth telling. And in the morning, when sun and birds woke them again, they would continue writing that story word by word, day by day, choice by choice. A man who'd lost his honor 7 years ago and found his heart. A woman who'd lost her legs and found her wings. A child who'd lost her mother and found her family. Together they were more than the sum of their broken parts. They were whole. They were home. They were loved. Tomorrow there would be furniture to buy and neighbors to meet, doctor's appointments and job interviews. There would be all the mundane magic of making a life together. But tonight, in their castle of boxes and dreams, they had everything they needed. They had each other. They had hope. They had love that had survived the worst 7 years of injustice, 2 years of paralysis, 6 years of single parenthood, and chosen to believe in better. And somewhere, perhaps, Richard Sterling stood at his office window looking out at a city full of strangers, understanding finally what he traded for power. 7 years ago, he destroyed a man to protect a system. Today, that man was holding his daughter, loving her in ways Richard never had. His signature had caused so much damage. But from that destruction, something beautiful had grown. Not forgiveness, not yet. Maybe never. But life continuing despite him. Because of him, beyond him, the woman in the wheelchair, the man dishonored 7 years ago. The motherless child. They'd found each other in the ruins and built something new, something stronger. They were proof that love wasn't about perfection, but about presence, not about wholeness, but about holding, not about standing, but about staying. And they stayed through that first night, and all the nights that followed. Through seasons of struggle and moments of joy, through the ordinary, extraordinary days of a family that had chosen to be family. They stayed and loved and lived, writing their story in the small actions that make a life worth living, a love worth giving, a future worth believing in. 7 years of waiting for justice. 2 years of learning to live without walking. 6 years of raising a daughter alone. All those broken roads had led here to this moment, to this family, to this love that was worth every moment of pain that preceded it. The end was really just the beginning of everything, of always.